right, hey, what's happening? What's going on? It's Scott Penfold, and this is another edition of the Loaded Radio podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I've got a couple of wicked guests on the show this week that I want to really sort of just jump right into. Devin Townsend, of course, just well known for just his abilities as a player, as a musician, and starting out with Steve Vai back in the 90s with the band Vai, and then going on to form Strapping Young Lad and the Devin Townsend Project. Well, he's got a new album out now called Powernerd. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. It's an album he actually just recorded it in like 11 days, believe it or not. So yeah, we'll be talking about that and much more with Devin Townsend in the first portion of the show today. But in the second segment, I'm going to be speaking with former Delain singer Charlotte Wessels. Just a phenomenal vocalist and has her third solo album called The Obsession, which is available now. So we'll be talking about that, and as well speaking about her career. I mean, she's got a great career and she's worked with some incredible people. What happened with Delain, we'll get into all of that with Charlotte on the show today too. Okay, so lots to get to. First off though, do gotta mention, check out loadedradio.com for all your hard rock and metal news daily. Also the 24-hour live heavy metal and hard rock radio station, that's there for you as well. You can download the free Loaded Radio app where you can get said stream as well, all the latest hard rock and metal news, and this very podcast right to your device. And as a matter of fact, yeah, subscribe to this podcast anywhere you're listening, via Spotify, Apple Podcasts, any way you are, because hey, we'd love to have you back. Okay, it's a great hard rock and metal discussion every week, courtesy of us here at Loaded Radio. So let's get into this, man. Devin Townsend, just an iconic guy. He's been on the podcast a couple of times before, and he has the new album Powernerd that's going to be dropping soon. So Devin joining us now here on the podcast. How you doing, man?
Every day is better than the day before, buddy. How about yourself?
That's fantastic. I'm doing great. It's good to talk to you again, and it's always a pleasure. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for taking the time as well.
Let's dive into Powernerd. October 25th, This drops, man. And I mean, this album was written in 11 days. What happened there? And what was that process? What happened?
Well, when I say it was written in 11 days, how I typically write in general is I write without any objective in mind and just write consistently. And by doing so, often these sessions end up resulting in fragments of songs that I put into piles, like virtual piles. Like, here's a chorus, here's an intro, here's an ending, here's a solo section, here's a tempo, whatever. This one's orchestral, so it goes on the orchestral pile. This one's more straightforward, it goes on that pile. This one's heavy, this one's meditation, whatever. And then by the time an opportunity presents itself for me to compile those ideas into a full record, I've got a really good starting point. And so the 11 days that went into Powernerd was other than, say, 3 songs that I wrote during that time, was taking those fragments of ideas and then compiling it into something that aesthetically and sonically had an identity.
From what I've heard of the album thus far, it's a very... I mean, dare I say, and again, I haven't heard the whole album, but almost a welcome return to a more heavier sound. Was that something that you set out to do with this album?
Yeah, and in a sense, because it's a part of a 4-record process, essentially like what I had done back in 2008 with Devin Townsend Project, Key, Addicted, Deconstruction, Ghost. It's like that, but, part 2. And knowing what the content of the material in the other 3 records is like, which is... in some parts troubling.
Oh, really?
Right?
Yeah.
I think that I felt that Powernerd, when I started putting together those choruses and those ideas, I wanted to not beat people up for 4 records straight. I was almost like, thanks for helping me pursue some of this more complicated creative avenue. Here's something that's more of a throwback in a sense. I didn't anticipate, however, that the original idea of it being a simple, more straightforward party-ish dev record was going to be kneecapped by a lot of things on a personal level that happened concurrently with the recording that were just so depressing that the nature of the record changed as a result of where I was emotionally during the writing of it. And it became a much more melancholy kind of lyrical slant.
Would that sort of lead into where the title of Powernerd came from for the album?
Yeah, in a sense, when you're dealing with grief, or you're dealing with loss, or you're dealing with any of these sorts of things that happen, I think that there's always two options with things that are that upsetting. One is give up, you know what I mean? Throw in the towel and you're good to go, right? I think that that's one option, but the other one is like, well, I've got people who rely on me, whether or not it's my parents or my kids or my my colleagues or whatever. People rely on me to not lose the plot and to not throw in the towel. Sometimes when you're working through things on an emotional level that are just so devastating, the sheer act of just getting up and getting things finished is where that title came from. I think that throughout my career, I very rarely fit in with whatever scene I've been involved with. For a while with strapping, I was in a heavy scene, and then, DTP, all of a sudden I'm in a prog scene, but I never really fit in with any of those places. And so the nerd definition definitely played into it. It's like, you're this sort of odd person that's functioning within this. And I think, yeah, perhaps. However, I can do it all. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I will do it all. I'll build my own damn studio. I'll build the desk that the thing goes on. I'll mix the record. I'll record it. I'll play the bass, guitar, drums, whatever. I'll do it all, because that's where the vision wants to go. And as opposed to waiting for options to present themselves to me, I'm like, I'll do this myself. And so that, combined with working through things on an emotional level that are just really difficult, seemed like a great definition of Powernerd.
And I know your body of work. I find some of it to be so beautiful, and some of it yet so thrusting and powerful. I do got to ask. I mean, yes, with the return to that heavy sort of sound with Powernerd, and with the emotional baggage that you were going through at the time and that you were carrying, did any of that beauty seem to seep through onto this album?
Oh yeah, very much. And the beauty represents itself in this case as being, don't gloss over the pain.
Right.
I think what I recognized during the making of this is maybe in the past, when I had to deal with someone dying or loss of any sort, my reaction to it was a lot more like Hallmark than I think is healthy. And that's like, oh, just think positive. If you're feeling sad, all you got to do is think positive, and that'll get you through it, right? Your thoughts create your actions, and I agree with that. Yet, I also had to come to terms with the fact that I was like, listen, I'm not enlightened. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not at the point where I have the spiritual acumen to be able to just think my way out of any scenario. And people would argue, it's like, well, it's because you tell yourself you can't or whatever. And I'm like, okay, yeah, but that's where I'm at. So with that comes the recognition that the pain that I'm feeling right now is not something that I want to not deal with. I don't want to pretend it doesn't exist. I don't want to pretend that I'm in a more enlightened place than I am as a human being. I'm where I'm at. You know what I mean? I'm a 52-year-old dude. I'm like, reasonably intelligent. I've got, a career that allows me to sustain myself and the family. I love music. But when I was dealing with these things, I'm like, this is where I'm at, man. This is hard. I'm angry. I'm sad. I'm depressed, whatever the emotion is. And so where the beauty seeps in with Powernerd is the recognition that those things are a part of the process. Whereas in the past, Addicted, perhaps as an example, it's easy to be like, don't even think about it. Just everything's great. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And when it isn't, I think to myself, how much of your creative process is being helped or hindered by lying to yourself about how you actually feel? And I don't, there's so many people I know that like me, do the same thing. It's like someone pisses them off, and then their reaction is just, well, I'm going to take the high road with this, and I'm not going to allow this to affect me. And I'm thinking, yeah, but you are affected. I can see it. You know what I mean? Just admit it, dude. It's okay. It's okay to not be, a guru, or it's okay to not be, like a teacher that has all the answers. And in fact, I think it hinders the work to not meet yourself where you are And so the beauty on Powernerd comes from that process of being able to say to myself, I wish I was more centered. I wish I was more balanced. I wish I was more this, and I'm working towards that, for sure. But where I'm at right now, maybe it's not there. And that's okay. And that's where the beauty lies, is that acknowledgement of where you actually are.
It almost sounds like the process for Powernerd is almost therapeutic for you.
Well, they all are in a sense, but it's also important for me to point out that in no way am I making that as like part of my public identity. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I'm the guy that makes these things that are based on catharsis and whatever. No, it's just, I don't know what else to write about. Like, I can't think of what else a musician would write about other than their personal experiences. Like, I guess if you're writing about fantasy, you know, it's like, here's a song about a dragon. Or if you're writing about the tropes that come with rock and roll, here's about a promiscuous young woman and my love of alcohol, or whatever it is. You know what I mean? It's like, if that's what your stock and trade is based on, then you're fortunate, because then there's never any. You just have to find different stories to write about. But that's not what I do. I couldn't care less about writing like that. It seems like so much work. All that's left as an option. It's like, okay, so what do you write about? Well, you write about what you know. And what I know, of course, it's fluid, because, I saw a quote from Muhammad Ali the other day I thought was great. He was like, anybody who's 50 who thinks the same way as they did when they were 20 has wasted 30 years.
Absolutely.
So I don't think the same way I did. I think the way I do now, but the process becomes about how do you articulate how you feel right now, and where is that different than where it was before, and why would one do that? Because I think that music is the byproduct of a process of trying to actualize your own nature in a lifetime, and so that's the options lyrically. That's the options, and the only criteria for whether or not I'm willing to accept that as something that I want other people to hear is whether or not it's articulate. Whether or not it summarizes that particular period in a way that I can get behind.
And I do want to ask, of course, about this too, when it comes to the title track, as we were discussing, Powernerd in itself. Jamie Jastin does appear on that song. How did you get Jamie Jastin involved? How did that process come about?
Jamie's, we've been, talking to each other and being on his podcast for many years and everything. And, we've toured together and all these things. Jamie, I've really respected him, because although he's in a band, like the hardcore scene and Hatebreed and all this sort of thing.
Yeah.
He was one of the few guys in the scene that when I talked as I do, he always was like, yeah, that's who you are. And I'm cool with that. There was never any sense from Jamie that it was like, what I did was just, either it's like, oh, it's funny because it's so weird, or it's more comedic because, the ways that I present the work, can be like a Powernerd video or a Ziltoid character where it's like, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so in a sense, I always felt like he had my back on a creative level, where he was able to say, yeah, it's different, but I understand what he's doing. And so because the nature of the Powernerd record was one of expressing emotions that are maybe not typically associated with metal or macho or manliness or whatever. It's like, the emotional content of Powernerd is like, hey, my kid's leaving home and I'm like older and I lost a friend and my wife and I have been together forever. We're trying to figure out our relationship. You know what I mean? Like, these are what the concept's about. And these aren't like, punch him in the throat and fucking slay a dragon. It's like, this is different, right? And so having Jamie on there, in a way, I wanted him on there because it's almost like he legitimizes that emotional content by someone coming from a different scene that is like is not rooted in that direct emotional content. I felt like his participation legitimized in some way to a scene, in my own mind. It's okay to think about these things. It's okay to be sensitive. It's okay to be this and that and the other thing. And he was always the guy in my life that was in bands that would be like, no, it's cool for this guy to do this. It's all right. And I love the legitimacy that he enabled by not making me feel stupid about what I do. And he was, he was great, and I really appreciate him.
He's doing fantastic with his podcast and everything, for sure.
He's great.
A few things that I want to delve in, because I mean, your career is just so vast. And I mean, I've been a fan, I'm going to be honest. And I brought this up last time I spoke to you, that I really became a fan of yours during Section Religion, the Vai release.
Of course.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And I think a lot of people were introduced to you via that album and via that time. Do you keep in touch with Steve Vai at all?
Yeah, he was just at my house for a week and a half.
Oh, you're kidding, really?
No, we have a good relationship, and he's involved with the Moth, and he's a very important person in my life for a lot of reasons. But after so many years, we can be honest with each other too. And I think that where a lot of times collaborative efforts fall apart is everybody has to pussyfoot around each other. Like specifically if you're both even reasonably accomplished in terms of putting out material, a lot of times collaborations with other musicians end up, everybody's very, very careful with each other's ideas, like as opposed to saying, hey, no, I'll listen to the idea and I appreciate it, but it's not for me. I don't like it, right? Sometimes that falls apart with people that don't have these more long-term relationships. And Steve and I now are in a position where when we do get together and we do jam and we do talk about concepts, we can vet each other's ideas from a place of more objective creative analysis. And I value that greatly, specifically with somebody who, again, is so accomplished, right? It's a great experience.
So would you ever consider actually collaborating and working with Steve again on anything?
Yeah, he was just here. We're collaborating on the Moth.
I love that, man. That's so great. I mean, essentially, Vai came out back in the 90s, and the fact that you guys still are being able to maintain that relationship till today, it speaks volumes, right? So that's very cool.
Yeah, and I also think what's important about that as well is the reason why we're able to still communicate is because we've gone through difficult periods, right? And what is another quote that I loved was that progress is only an awkward conversation away, and I think that I think that if you're in a position with somebody, if you're fortunate enough to be in a position with somebody where you can have those difficult conversations, then that's where real music is going to come from. Where it isn't, because I often, you get asked these questions when you're younger, like, oh, could you describe what a dream band would be like? Like, oh, okay, Jimi Hendrix on guitar, John Bonham on drum, you know what I mean? And you go through all this shit. But you think to yourself, maybe the reason that those players were so fantastic is because of the environments that they found themselves in. Like maybe the reason why Jimi Hendrix's brilliance came out is because he didn't have to answer to anybody. He just had the other two players in his band, and perhaps if you did put him into a band, maybe his social anxiety would make it that, the other guitar player, maybe Jimmy Page or whatever, would just like steamroll him. And then by the time you're done, you get this super group album that's not as good as any of them individually, right?
True.
And I think a lot of the reason why that happens is the dynamic has to be established. And if you're fortunate enough to be with musicians for many years, then that dynamic, you've worked through the arguments, you've worked through the fuck this guy or the romance period even. And then at that point, when someone has an idea, you're best suited to listen to it, because why would they say it other than this person who's brilliant has a good idea, or an idea at least. And that's where we find ourselves. And that's also where I find myself with Mike Keneally, for example, who is also just here, and a bunch of other collaborators that I work with. We've worked through these moments that we can be honest with each other about the music.
That's fantastic, man. Now, I got to ask, as a fan, when can we expect to hear some of this material that you've been working on with Steve?
Well, I think it's a work in progress in that what we're working on together with the Moth is rooted in something that I've already written. When he comes here, a lot of it is just like, he has ideas. He's like, what if we tried this? What if the chorus was doubled? Things like that. So in an immediate sense, the Moth, the performances that we start with, because we're doing performances of it with the orchestra prior to the record coming out, happens in March of 2025.
Okay.
But then where it evolves with Steve and I guess the thing that is frustrating to some of the audience is I personally am in no rush with any of these things.
Sure.
So the honest answer is when it's ready, it'll be out. And what plays into when that is just everybody's so busy, right? Like there's no direct plans, but it's already in the process. If that's a cop out of an answer, but it's an answer nonetheless.
Still an optimistic answer, though.
Yeah, there you go. I'll take it. I'll take optimism. Yeah, exactly.
This one might not be as optimistic, but I do have to ask because it's what a lot of our listeners wanted me to bring up. You still have the certainty that strapping young lad is a thing of the past and will never resurrect.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to be unequivocal with answers because I've also said, at some point that I would never, slam my balls in the top drawer, and yet here we are, right? But I don't. So with that being said, I mean, it's like when someone says never say never, it always reminds me of Dumb and Dumber, where he's like, so there is a chance.
Yeah, right.
But as a dude, I got no fucking desire to do that at all. And
None.
Not only do I not have any desire, it seems absurd to think that the optimism from the audience would assume that me at 52 would be able to do it with any sort of authenticity. The things that drove Strapping Young Lad when I was 25 were things that, by the nature of my process, I worked through by making the records.
Right.
And, it's like, what I find is difficult is like I'll play a couple of strapping songs when I go out for sure because I'm proud of the music and I'm proud of what we did. But the honest answer is I just don't want to do that. I just do not want to do that. And my hope is that when people hear that, they don't think, oh, he doesn't want to do it because he dislikes the fans or he's it's got nothing. Dude, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the audience that's allowed me to do what I do. But I would hope that the audience would also be able, if they're really into what I do, to recognize that the way that I do what I do means that I have to draw from what my current circumstances are. That's all there is to it. Again, If I was like AC/DC or Dio or something like that, then sure, yeah, man, it'd be easy. It's all part of the same canon of work. But for me, they were all just moments in time, and those moments don't exist, but the next one does. So the boredom that I feel about having to go back seems, at least for now, I got zero desire to do so. I'd much rather work on what I'm doing now. And then what that brings to the table is there's certain people like, well, I don't like what you're doing now. And I'm like, fair enough. What I mean? Fair enough, dude. Like, another thing I would add to this explanation is I've got zero desire to try and lure somebody in who has no interest in what I'm doing now to what I'm doing now. Like zero. Right. If you like it, you like it, and if you don't, you don't. And that's life, isn't it? Right?
Can the same be said for the Devin Townsend project?
Maybe. But I also play that when I play live now too. I mean, honestly, I don't think about it. I don't really care. The interpersonal aspects of putting together a group from the past. My life has been so complicated for the past few years that although I'm in contact with those guys, I even said to one of them in my last mail, I was like, I just don't have the energy to work through the dynamic right now.
Right.
But it doesn't mean I don't love them. It doesn't mean that I don't respect them. It doesn't mean that I don't love the music. I'm just, I got parents to take care of. I got, dogs. I've got all these things in my life that demand my attention. Kids, school, and I don't have time enough for that as it is.
Understood. I got you.
Every time I get asked that question, which is often, I'll just keep telling people how I feel. I saw an interview with another buddy of mine where they were asking about him resurrecting the original version of his band from the 80s, and his reaction to it was really angry. He's like, quit fucking asking me that question or whatever. And I don't feel that way. I'm thrilled that people love it. But the thing that they love about it was rooted in me being honest, man. You know? And so I'm just doing the same now. And I'll tell you my honest feeling is that. Like, fuck, no, man. Jesus Christ. Not right now. Thank you.
What about the Obviouser album? Are we ever going to get that?
Obviouser manifested as a different direction, and I appreciate you bringing it up. It's bass driven, that project.
I know, with an Ampeg rig, and
Yep. And but the pile, the Obviouser pile hasn't grown. So how I decide which album takes pole position is when that pile has gotten to the point where it's ripe. And ripe is usually like 10 songs that I like. I think Obviouser's at 2.
Oh, okay. So it's going to be a while.
Yeah, but I mean, because of the way I write, if I do write something bass-driven, I'm like, well, I know what pile this one goes on. And so, you know.
And I did want to ask about this, is that you had previously mentioned you had actually considered starting a cult, becoming a cult leader. What was that about?
Well, I don't think I decided that I was going to become a cult leader. You know, embarrassingly, what I'll do is I'll describe the process that probably led to whatever quote that was that we're pulling from. When I was younger, I went through the Steve Vai experience. I went through a lot of like fame at an early age, to the degree that we did. It's not, we're talking Taylor Swift type, but I mean, you know, for somebody, from a kid from Surrey, it was like a big deal when I went to LA and did Steve's project and all this.
Yeah.
And I had never taken drugs or drank or anything like that when I moved to LA. And then, you know, I came back from that experience and it was super overwhelming. And then I moved to the UK and joined a band that all they did was drugs and alcohol and party and beat each other up, right? And then when I came back, I started experimenting with psychedelic drugs, you know, mushrooms or acid or what have you. And I think in a controlled environment, where those psychedelic experiences can be guided and in a safe way, the transformative qualities of specifically psilocybin, I think is one of the most important things actually for the species. Whether or not it's for everybody is another conversation, but it's really, it can be really a progressive psychological experience. However, when I did it with a bunch of buddies in a barn, and then went out to a club, and you know, and I interpreted those things that in a controlled environment can be like, oh, okay, well, there's layers to perception, and the world in which we participate in is like, you know, a dimension of that perception in some ways.
Yes.
And yes, you are the center of that, but so is everybody else. But because of a combination of an unguided series of experiences and the arrogance that came from the career that I had at that point, I interpreted that experience, that anybody else who would have that would say, oh, this is a universal experience. I interpreted it as like, oh, clearly I'm the center of the fucking universe.
Right.
So I went through what can be most easily described as is like a Christ complex. And it's, I know like maybe 5 other artists who remain nameless, but I know you know them, that went through the same thing.
I know them.
So, yeah. So this is all, and other ones that I work with that you probably wouldn't even expect. You're like, oh, him too. But what I found by starting to talk about it is the amount of people that went through that is surprising. And I think that the career that I have had exacerbates that, because it gives you this sense of like self-importance. It's like, oh no, I'm the center, clearly. And so during that time, it's not like I wanted to start a cult. I just started acting in accordance to how typically people who have these kind of inflated senses of self-importance act. I understand the universe. I have answers, all this shit. And then when it's about 96, 97, then when I went about like just thoroughly making a mess of my life, because not only am I not the center of the universe in a sense that would be conversationally appropriate to somebody else who's the center of the universe.
Yeah.
But I also, all these answers that I thought I had, I was not qualified to, you know, teach this shit or talk. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like the arrogance of it, the hubris of it was so overwhelming that when I finally came to, again, you know, when I finally was able to look around and wipe my eyes and say, oh God, this person here, I told them what they should be doing, and this person, I was critical of them for something that all this typical shit that happens with that. at that point, I had, pie on my face in a way that, I've been done interviews about it. I'd done all this shit. And I had to go up to these people, and some of which are just like, fuck this guy. He's out of my life. And other people, I had to say, hey, listen, I recognize the ways in which I was wrong. But that process yielded so many lessons. And there's some people, I have to admit, that they don't come back from that. Maybe they don't have people tolerant enough to say, yeah, you were an asshole. Where are we now? But I was fortunate that I did. And so the lessons that I learned from that kind of like thinking, I think were really important for me. Had I not gone through that, I might have still been stuck there, right?
Devin, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you as always. And until next time, my friend, I look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you so much for everything, brother. I'll talk to you soon.
Devin Townsend is his name, and the new album is called Powernerd, which arrives on October 25th. And again, the stuff that I've heard, and possibly you have as well, it just sounds very Devin Townsend-y, man. It's very cool. It's very full. It's very heavy. It's a heavy album, which is really great that he's diving back into that, right? But hey, what's going on? It's Scott Penfold. We're about midway through the show here, as I am now going to be joined by former Delain vocalist Charlotte Wessels. Now, Charlotte has just released her third solo album, The Obsession, and of course, we're going to be diving into that with her right now. Charlotte, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast this week. How you doing? How are things?
I am fine. How are you?
Great, thank you. Lots to talk about, of course. I mean, the third studio album, The Obsession, is out now, and I've listened to the album front to back. I think it's very, very well done. It's such a great work that you've put together here. And I do have to ask, who produced the album?
I did.
Did you really?
Yeah, I did have help. A lot of people, like the band was really involved. Timo was really involved. My mixer, Guido Albers, was also really involved. He also helped with finding the right mastering engineer. But eventually, yeah.
Did you find that to be like a pretty massive task, or is it something that you've done before and it's now just become second nature for you?
No, I actually, before the two compilation albums that I did, I had never ever produced anything. In fact, I feel like those compilation albums are me very publicly practicing my production skills.
Really?
So I don't think I could have done it without that. And I also feel like whenever this is asked, I kind of have to mention I have to credit those who've been really helpful and supportive of me, in this entire process, also in the parts where I have less experience. But yeah, it was wonderful to have that trust from everyone involved. Also, I just got great things to work with, with the team that I've worked with. So that makes it easier.
Sure, yeah. Some of the songs on the album that I definitely wanted to talk about with you. First off, the first single, The Exorcism. What can you tell me about that song? Where did that come from for you?
That song is very much about it's funny. I was actually I release a song every month on my Patreon, and when I wrote The Exorcism, I was actually working on another song that month, and it wasn't happening. And I had my mixing deadline in 2 days, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to do something entirely different. And then The Exorcism kind of came out as like an exorcism.
Like an exorcism, right?
Yeah, it was really one of those songs that felt like it had to be. It's very much about kind of challenges in life that I've personified as demons in the song, that can or cannot be exorcised, visiting you at different points in life and thinking that you get rid of them, and then realizing that you didn't, and about the question of whether you'll ever be truly done with them, or whether it's just something that you'll have to keep dealing with in different shapes or forms throughout life. It's probably my favorite song on the album. It's also probably the one that I can still not sing it without getting close to the emotion that I felt, when first writing it. And it always kind of still always takes something out of me to sing it.
So a very powerful song, then a very emotional song for you.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And you can really feel it too when you listen to the song. It does sort of have that spark where, something gets jarred inside of you, which is the beauty of music, and the beauty of your music in this album in particular. Another song, Dopamine. I like Dopamine.
So dopamine is also, this song has a weird backstory because I initially wrote it for a songwriting date with these two dance producers.
Okay.
Yeah, we were going to meet, and I was very well prepared, and I wrote a couple of songs, just outlines, like some chords, a little bit of an arrangements, vocal lines, lyrics, and this was one of them. When I got there, they kind of didn't want to hear it. They just wanted me to top line on things that they had laying around. So I was like, well, fine. But then I came back home and I was, but I actually like this one, So I was like, fine, I'll do it myself. And in the very first version, it was that I put on Patreon, it was just harp and harp vocals, one synthesizer. Like, it was very minimal.
Yeah.
And then we made like an entire band version out of that for the record. The song itself is about kind of the numbness that I felt when I was on a certain antidepressant. And I was feeling kind of weird about the fact that it was so hard to find things about the side effects. While I think that in a lot of countries, like 1 out of 10 people is using this type of medication. So I felt bad about the taboo around it. So it was like, okay, I think it's good to make the song about this, and I also think it's good to be like open and explicit about what it's about. And then, of course, it's I am so happy that Simone is on the track, Simone Simmons from Epica, and we also it also kind of ties in beautifully with our connection, because the very first time that I opened up about kind of what I was going through and like the antidepressants and that I was kind of going through. Like she reached out to me and she texted me. She was like, hey, let's talk. And it was so sweet. And she didn't have to do that. And we kind of connected from there. And then when I put that first version out, she was like, hey, I've been listening to this song on repeat and I really like it. So then I was like, okay, if this is coming on the album, it would be wonderful if it was a duet. So yeah, so long story for the song to get where it was. And it's also funny because, I rearranged the song with Timo for the band version, and we worked with Vikram Shankar, who made orchestral and additional key arrangements for The Obsession. He didn't know like the origins of the song, and he was working on the track, and he was texting me like, hey, it's funny, if you leave out the drums and the guitars, you'll get like the song of the summer, like it will work very well as like an EDM track. And I was like, you got it. It's still in there. So this is actually a song that we have multiple versions of, and it kind of works in multiple versions as well. So that's cool.
I want to ask you about one more song, The Crying Room.
This was probably the most complicated song in the way that it came together in the writing phase for me. Like the arrangement phase, and everyone performed like amazingly on it. I love Timo's guitar solo there, and especially like the little thing he does pre-guitar solo also when he does this crying with his guitar. Like, I felt so touched when I first heard that. But yeah, the song came together weird. Like I was actually working on two different songs before I realized that they were the same song. And this rarely ever happens to me, because I don't generally try to put like different song ideas together, because then I feel it will always feel constructed to me. Sure. But this one was really like I was stuck on two songs, and then I was listening through and I was like, how did I not know that this was one song? So that was interesting. Then I got COVID and my deadline came up. So I had to do this really weird thing at the end of the song where instead of, transposing up is pretty common, for the last chorus. Like you give it one last push, you transpose it, you make it, you put it higher. But I actually had to transpose it down because I could not sing in the original key anymore because I had COVID and my throat was fucked. Yeah. So I had to transpose it down, and that also inspired the outro, because I was like, if I'm here, it's weird to transpose it down, then we have to take it like all the way down and strip it all the way back. And I thought that was like that was rather circumstantial. But then when we came to like the rearrangement phase and the rewriting phase, I was like, okay, so now I will transpose it up, and then I kind of really liked it. So this was the first time when I was like, yay, COVID, good, you did a good thing. Like it, but yeah, lyrically, it is very much about fear and about the fear of failure. It was inspired by the very first gig that we did for the compilation albums of Tales of Volume 1 and 2. My tour manager asked me, she said, hey, do you want your own dressing room for the day? And I was like, no, I don't need my own dressing room. But then I thought I will probably have like a little breakdown at one point, and I did. And I was like, I just need a place where I can go where I don't kill the vibe for everyone, when I eventually have my little panic attack.
Right.
So she made the party room, and then she made the quiet room. But I was calling it back then. I was already calling it the crying room. Like, Felicity, please make me a crying room. And but then I thought, hey, there's a song in that, and I chose to kind of go with the Homeric approach because Homer's Odyssey starts with Muse, sing to me. The story of, and this is not the exact word, but the story of a man who is so good at competing in everything and super heroic. But I thought if for a song about the fear of failure, it would be interesting to do Muse sing to me the story of a man who's so fucking terrified of anything and everything. And yeah.
Getting into you as an artist and getting into your career, why the decision to step away from Delain back in 2021?
There was a conflict and we couldn't overcome it. Like that was simply like that's a very short version of it. Yeah, I've never really gone into detail about it, and I still don't really feel about going into detail about it. The thing that I will say is we spent a lot of time trying to work things out. Like we were already putting much energy in that before we kind of got to the conflict where it was hard to come back from. But yeah, especially since, the pandemic happened, we had no gigs. Like we had all the time in the world to think like, okay, what are we going to do? Will we be able to solve this? And we took a very long time. And in the end, the answer was no. There was no solution that we could find where we would continue in that way. And, a part of me, like, it's such a big part of my life. And I'm also like, I'm very happy. I'm very proud with what we did in that time. So it's frustrating to me that we couldn't work it out. The thing that kind of comforts me is the fact that we did take so much time to explore like all the different possibilities. Like, could we make this work? Yeah. I don't feel like there was really another option. So that's why.
Do you still keep in contact with Martin at all, or is there no contact there at all? Or
I ran into him at one point, but there's been no contact otherwise. And I think like right after it, there's been some contact here and there, but that was about it.
So at this point, the door is completely closed on that chapter of your life. Like you could never see yourself possibly returning to that setting at all. I mean, you've moved on. This is now simply your direction now. Is that right?
Yeah.
Being a fan of Delain myself, I love the work that you did there, and I love the story of the band. How it really wasn't even supposed to really be a band in the first place. You know what I mean? And you just sort of ended up in a studio, and then Roadrunner picked you up, and you guys had this great run there. But I think a great launch for you, a great starting board for you, which quite substantial, of course. I mean, it certainly has paid off. I mean,
16-year long starting board.
Exactly, right? You know what I mean? But look at you today. I mean, I got to bring this up. Back in 2020, you released Lizzie with Alyssa White Glutes. I love that song. That is a killer track. And I always wanted to ask you how that came together.
I think this was specifically because this was sort of at the beginning of the pandemic. Of course, Alyssa and I have worked together several times before within the context of Delain. We were both asked for this. There was this online, I think it was a Patreon panel thing online. It was a lot of fun, but they invited like several artists, and some artists were like directly connected to like their rehearsal room, and they were live streaming like a live track that they were doing. And Elisa and I were both invited, and we were both like, I was like, yeah, it's just me in my basement. I don't know what I'm going to do. And she was like, it's me in my studio. I also don't know what I was going to do. So we figured we should do something together kind of for that occasion. Also to kind of show, because this was very much like about the pandemic and what can we do. And we were like, hey, we are both on Patreon. We can do like a Patreon supported track together, a collaboration like overseas. And it was kind of supposed to be this kind of encouraging moment of okay, we cannot tour, we might not be like in a rehearsal space together, but we can still work together, even at a distance. And that's when we started working on Lizzie, and we took Elizabeth Sedal's poetry as a starting point, and that was. The rest is history.
Now, in the past, you've mentioned previous influences. I mean, you've mentioned influences, everyone from rather like Sia, System of a Down, Kate Bush, numerous artists. Do these artists still influence you? And have you picked up any new influences along the way?
Yeah, they do. I love them. I was actually supposed to go to Nick Cave tonight, but I'm not going, so I should not. Yeah, but... So definitely new influences. I've been listening to classical music a little bit more. Also, like I love Chappell Roan, which I had tickets for her 2 years ago in like a tiny club not tiny, it was the Melkweg, it was a few hundred people, but now she just made the record for like the most people in attendance at Lollapalooza, so I'm never ever going to see her in a tiny venue again.
Right.
Also there's some pop girlies that have been inspiring, like also Love Aurora and Florence always, and I've also been listening to Vola a lot, and we're going on tour with them, so that's amazing. Like I've been listening to a little bit more prog as well.
Any like heavier sort of metal bands right now? Any sort of the heavier stuff?
Well, I, along with everyone else, of course, and not just inspired by the Olympics, but I've been listening to a lot of Gojira.
Of course, everyone is, yeah.
And I also, I've been listening to Leprous lately. Really love Zeal and Ardor, although is that heavy? I mean,
Zeal and Ardor is kind of, what are they? Are they black metal, or are they sort of, what are they? Like, yeah.
What are you? Like, I don't know. It feels happy to my soul.
It feels happy, yeah, but that's all that matters. And I just interviewed Leprous, and they're great guys, and I love Leprous as well. They're a killer band. Charlotte, thank you so much again for your time. And are you going to be hitting the road? I guess you're going to be just touring. We'll see you out there on the road at some point soon, or?
Yeah, we're going to be doing a European tour first in November with Vola, which is. I love them, and we are also working on making it over. But I'm not entirely sure when we're going to do that. Now we're going to do that yet. So
okay. Well, I'm looking forward to that announcement. I'll certainly be there. And best of luck to you with this album, and best of luck to you. It was an honor talking with you. Hopefully, we'll talk to you again sometime soon.
Thank you so much. I look forward to it. Have a great day over there.
All the best. Bye-bye. There she is, Charlotte Wessels, with the new album, The Obsession, available now. You got to check that out, man. A great listen. And man, I'm telling you, if you were a fan of Delain, but if you're into like symphonic and that really full sounding sort of epic metal, she certainly encapsulates that. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up then, I guess. Yes, don't forget, check out loadedradio.com, like I mentioned before. Also, subscribe to this podcast. Listen to the online radio station with live personalities. Yeah, streaming 24/7 for free. Get that at loadedradio.com and via the free Loaded Radio app as well, okay? All right, I'm Scott Penfold, and we'll talk to you again next week on an all-new edition of the Loaded Radio podcast.